What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. If you think you've heard the most shocking family secret, wait till you hear this one. Nobody ever suspected Eleanor Walsh. This sweet 78-year-old grandmother lived quietly in her white picket fence house in Springfield neighborhood. Every morning at 7 a.m., she'd wake up, water her roses in the garden, and spend afternoons knitting on her front porch. Her neighbors knew her as the perfect grandmother. She attended church on Sundays and joined the library book club every Wednesday. Her grandchildren, Emma and Jake, visited her every weekend. Eleanor would always bake cookies for them, tell old stories, and stroke their hair gently. 16-year-old Emma and 14-year-old Jake thought their grandmother was just an ordinary, loving grandmother. They didn't know much about Eleanor's past. They only knew they had never met their grandfather, and Eleanor had told them she lost him when they were very young. That Saturday, everything would change. While Eleanor was preparing lunch in the kitchen, she suddenly felt ill. She felt a sharp pain in her chest and collapsed to the floor. Emma screamed and called 911, while Jake rushed to Eleanor's side in panic. When the ambulance arrived, Eleanor was unconscious. While waiting at the hospital, Emma had gone home to get Eleanor's belongings. She would need clean clothes and personal items for her hospital stay. Eleanor's bedroom was very organized. An old wooden wardrobe, an antique vanity table, and framed family photos on the wall. Emma quickly gathered some night clothes and also took Eleanor's black leather purse that she always used. Sitting in Eleanor's hospital room, Emma opened the purse. Inside were Eleanor's wallet, glasses, and handkerchiefs. But at the very bottom of the purse, she noticed a small compartment closed with a zipper. Curiously, she opened it and found an old yellowed photograph. When she looked at the photograph, her breath caught. Jake also approached curiously. In the photograph was a young woman, but this woman looked nothing like the Eleanor they knew. A young woman in a black leather jacket, dark makeup, smoking a cigarette, standing next to a motorcycle. But the most shocking part was the tattoos on the woman's arms. Large, intricate tattoos, and that hard, rebellious look in her eyes. Emma tremblingly looked at the back of the photograph. There was an old date, written by hand. Rita, 1965. Who was Rita, and why was this photograph in Eleanor's purse? Jake whispered in amazement. This definitely isn't Grandma. Emma was thinking the same thing. This woman in the photograph was completely different from their sweet, cookie-baking grandmother. This woman looked dangerous, rebellious, wild, even frightening. At that moment, the door opened, and Eleanor's doctor entered. Her condition is stable, he said, but she needs a few days of rest. By the way, while filling out the hospital forms, we noticed something strange. We couldn't find any medical records under the name Eleanor Walsh. There are no records before 1985. It's as if she didn't exist before that date. Emma and Jake looked at each other in shock. The mysterious photograph in their hands suddenly seemed much more important. What had happened in Eleanor's past? Who was Rita? And why were there no medical records? Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable family secrets like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The next morning, Eleanor was awake, but weak. Emma and Jake sat beside her bed, the photograph hidden in Emma's jacket pocket. They didn't know how to bring up what they'd found. Eleanor looked at them with tired eyes and smiled weakly. "My dear children," she said softly, "I'm sorry I scared you." Emma couldn't hold back anymore. She pulled out the photograph and placed it on Eleanor's bedside table. "Grandma, who is Rita?" Eleanor's face went completely white when she saw the photograph. Her hands started trembling, and for a moment She looked like she might faint again. She stared at the photograph for a long time, without saying anything. Then tears began flowing from her eyes. "Where did you find this?" she asked with a shaky voice. "In your purse, Grandma. In the secret compartment," Jake replied. The doctor also said, "You have no medical records before 1985. What's going on?" Eleanor closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a look the children had never seen before. Not the sweet grandmother look, but something harder, more determined. "Rita Rodriguez was my name," she said quietly, "before I became Eleanor Walsh, before I became your grandmother, before I became the person you know." Emma felt the world spinning around her. "What do you mean, Grandma?" Eleanor looked out the window for a long time. "I wasn't always the person you know, children. In 1965, I was 23 years old and a completely different person. I was part of a motorcycle gang in Los Angeles. We called ourselves the Night Riders. I was their only female member, and I was probably the most dangerous one among them." Jake's mouth dropped open. This couldn't be real. Their sweet grandmother, a member of a motorcycle gang. But Eleanor continued. "I had been on the streets since I was 16. My parents had died in a car accident, and I had no other family. I learned to survive on my own. I learned to fight, to steal when necessary, to protect myself. The Night Riders became my family." Emma was trying to process what she was hearing. The woman in the photograph suddenly made more sense. That hard look, those tattoos, that rebellious stance. "We weren't just any motorcycle gang," Eleanor continued. "We were involved in some very dangerous business. Drug trafficking, armed robbery, protection rackets. I was good at what I did, maybe too good." She paused and looked at her grandchildren. "I know this is shocking for you, the grandmother you know, the woman who bakes cookies and tells bedtime stories. That person is real too. But she's not the whole story." Eleanor began telling them about her life as Rita, how she had earned respect in a world dominated by men, how she had planned heists, how she had fought rival gangs, how she had lived each day not knowing if it would be her last. "In 1967, we planned the biggest job of our lives," she said. "A bank robbery in downtown LA. We had been planning for months. Everything was perfect, or so we thought. But something went wrong that day. Very wrong." Quick reminder to subscribe for more jaw-dropping family secrets like this one. Because what Eleanor is about to tell her grandchildren will change everything they thought they knew about family loyalty. The bank job had been their masterpiece. Rita and 5 other members of the Night Riders had studied the First National Bank of Los Angeles for 3 months. They knew every guard's routine, every camera angle, every escape route. Rita was the strategist, the brains of the operation. She had drawn detailed maps, timed everything down to the second. On March 15th, 1967, they walked into that bank wearing motorcycle helmets and leather jackets. Rita carried a sawed-off shotgun, her heart pounding with adrenaline. The job was supposed to take exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. For the first 3 minutes, everything went according to plan. The guards were subdued, the customers were on the floor, and Rita was directing her teammates to the vault. She felt that familiar rush of power, that feeling of being untouchable. But then she heard sirens. Too many sirens. Too early. Someone tipped them off. Rita realized immediately. The police were surrounding the building faster than they should have been able to respond. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone in their own gang had betrayed them. Inside the bank, chaos erupted. Rita's teammates started panicking. One of them, a hothead named Tommy, started waving his gun at the hostages. Rita knew they had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether they lived or died. That's when she saw her, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, hiding behind her mother near the teller counter. The child was crying silently, her big brown eyes filled with terror. For some reason, looking into those eyes, Rita felt something she had never felt before: guilt. Real, crushing guilt. In that moment, Rita Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of continuing with the robbery, instead of fighting her way out, she threw down her weapon. "Nobody gets hurt," she announced to her shocked teammates. "We're done." Tommy stared at her in disbelief. "Rita, what the hell are you doing?" "I said we're done," she shouted back. "Put your guns down. Now." But Tommy wasn't listening. He was high on something, his eyes wild with panic and drugs. He grabbed the little girl, pulling her away from her mother. "If we're going down, we're taking someone with us," he screamed. Rita saw the terror in the child's eyes, and something inside her snapped, not with anger, but with a clarity she had never experienced. She lunged forward, tackling Tommy to the ground. In the struggle, his gun went off. The bullet hit Rita in the shoulder, spinning her around. Blood soaked through her leather jacket, but she didn't care. The little girl ran back to her mother's arms. Safe. That was all that mattered. The police stormed in moments later. Rita was on the ground, bleeding, watching as her former gang members were arrested. One by one, Tommy was screaming curses at her, calling her a traitor. The other gang members looked at her with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. But Rita felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Wait till you hear what happened next, because this is where Rita Rodriguez died and Eleanor Walsh was born. In prison, Rita spent 3 years thinking about that little girl's eyes. She had received a lighter sentence by cooperating with authorities and helping them understand the gang's operations. Her lawyer, a woman named Margaret Walsh, visited her regularly. Margaret was different from anyone Rita had ever met. She was educated, dignified, but not condescending. She saw something in Rita that Rita couldn't see in herself: potential, hope, the possibility of redemption. "You saved that child's life," Margaret told her during one visit. "That took courage, real courage, the kind that can change a person's entire life." Rita didn't believe her at first. "I'm a criminal, lady. I've done things you can't imagine." "You were a criminal," Margaret corrected. Past tense. "The question is, who do you want to be now?" Margaret offered Rita something no one had ever offered her before: a chance at a completely new life. When Rita was released in 1970, Margaret helped her disappear. New identity, new social security number, new everything. Rita Rodriguez was declared dead in a motorcycle accident. Eleanor Walsh was born. Margaret had no children of her own and had grown to care for Rita like a daughter. She taught Eleanor how to speak differently, how to carry herself with dignity, how to blend into respectable society. Eleanor learned to cook, to sew, to garden. She learned to be gentle, to be kind, to be the opposite of everything Rita had been. But it wasn't fake, Eleanor told her grandchildren, tears streaming down her face. "The love I felt for your grandfather when I met him, the love I have for your father, the love I have for you too, that's all real. The gentleness, the kindness, that's who I chose to become. Rita was who I had to be to survive. Eleanor is who I chose to be to live." Emma was crying now too. "But Grandma, why didn't you ever tell us?" Eleanor reached for her granddaughter's hand. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I used to be, you wouldn't love the person I became. Afraid that my past would contaminate your future." Jake, who had been silent for most of the story, finally spoke up. "Grandma, that's the most incredible thing I've ever heard. You literally changed your entire life. You became a completely different person Because you wanted to be better. Eleanor looked surprised. You're not disgusted? You're not afraid of me? Afraid of you? Emma laughed through her tears. Grandma, you're like a superhero. You saved that little girl. You chose to change your life, and you built this amazing family. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. But Eleanor's past wasn't finished with her yet. The next day, while Eleanor was still recovering in the hospital, a man in his 50s walked into the lobby, asking for Eleanor Walsh. He was tall, wearing an expensive suit, but his eyes were cold. The hospital receptionist directed him to Eleanor's room. Emma and Jake were in the cafeteria when he arrived. Hello, Rita, he said quietly. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice immediately, even after all these years. It was Vincent Morales, Tommy's younger brother, the one who had sworn revenge against her for betraying the gang. Vincent, she whispered, how did you find me? Vincent smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It took me 50 years, but I never stopped looking. You destroyed my family, Rita. Tommy died in prison because of you. He got stabbed by rival gang members who thought he was weak because he got taken down by a woman. Eleanor's heart was racing. Vincent, that was a lifetime ago. I'm not that person anymore. Oh, I know exactly who you are now, Vincent said, pulling a chair closer to her bed. Eleanor Walsh, respected member of the community, loving grandmother. Such a nice, quiet life you've built for yourself. He leaned in closer. But your grandchildren don't know, do they? Your neighbors don't know. Your church friends don't know. What would happen if they found out their sweet little grandmother was once Rita Rodriguez, armed robber and gang member? Eleanor realized what was happening. You want money? I want justice, Vincent corrected. My brother died because of you. Now you're going to pay. Not with your life, that would be too easy. You're going to pay with everything you've built. Your reputation, your family's respect, your perfect little life. Eleanor felt that familiar fire rising in her chest, the same fire that had made Rita Rodriguez feared on the streets of Los Angeles. For a moment, Vincent saw a flash of the dangerous woman she used to be. You leave my family alone, she said quietly, but her voice carried a threat that made Vincent step back. Or what? Vincent challenged. You're an old woman now, Rita. What are you going to do? But Eleanor wasn't finished. She had survived on the streets, survived prison, survived building an entirely new life. She wasn't going to let anyone threaten her grandchildren. Just then, Emma and Jake returned from the cafeteria. When they walked into the room and saw Vincent, they immediately sensed something was wrong. Grandma, who is this? Emma asked. Vincent turned to look at the teenagers, and his smile became cruel. I'm an old friend of your grandmother's. We go way back. I was just telling her about some stories from her past that I think you'd find very interesting. Eleanor made a decision in that moment that would change everything again. She looked at Emma and Jake, then at Vincent. Vincent Morales, she said clearly. Meet my grandchildren. Emma and Jake, meet Vincent. He's the brother of a man I once knew in Los Angeles. A very dangerous man who wants to hurt our family because of choices I made 50 years ago. Vincent's confident expression faltered. This wasn't going according to his plan. But Eleanor wasn't done. You want to threaten me, Vincent? Fine. But let me tell you something. I may be 78 years old, but I remember exactly how to handle men like you. I've been Eleanor Walsh for 50 years, but Rita Rodriguez is still in here when she needs to be. She sat up straighter in her hospital bed, and for a moment, Vincent saw the dangerous woman who had once commanded respect in a motorcycle gang. You have 30 seconds to walk out of this room and never contact my family again, or you're going to discover that some people never really change. They just choose to be better. And right now, I'm choosing to protect my family by any means necessary. Vincent looked at Eleanor, then at Emma and Jake, who were standing protectively near their grandmother's bed. He realized he had underestimated not just Eleanor, but the strength of the family she had built. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied firmly. "Tommy made his own choices. They led to his own consequences. I've made my choices, and they led to this family. If you want to threaten that, you'll have to go through me. And trust me, Vincent, you don't want to find out what that means." After Vincent left, Eleanor turned to her grandchildren. She expected to see fear or disappointment in their eyes. Instead, she saw pride. "Grandma," Jake said, "that was the most badass thing I've ever seen." Emma nodded in agreement. "You protected us, just like you protected that little girl in the bank all those years ago. You're still the same person inside, someone who protects people she loves." Eleanor began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. "I was so afraid you'd think differently of me." "We do think differently of you," Emma said. "We think you're even more amazing than we thought before. You literally rebuilt yourself into a better person. How many people can say that?" Eleanor realized something that day. She had spent 50 years hiding from Rita Rodriguez, ashamed of who she used to be. But maybe Rita wasn't something to be ashamed of. Maybe Rita was the strength that had allowed Eleanor to become the person she wanted to be. 3 weeks later, Eleanor was back home, fully recovered. But she made some changes. She joined a support group for people with criminal pasts who had turned their lives around. She started volunteering at a youth center, working with teenagers who reminded her of her younger self, lost, angry, looking for family in dangerous places. One day, while working at the youth center, a social worker brought in a new case, a 16-year-old girl who had been arrested for armed robbery. She was angry, defiant, and reminded Eleanor powerfully of someone she used to know. The girl's name was Maria, and she was sitting in the corner with her arms crossed, glaring at everyone who tried to talk to her. Eleanor walked over and sat down next to her. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to be a lot like you." Maria looked at her skeptically. "Yeah, right, lady. I bet you've never even gotten a speeding ticket." Eleanor smiled. "Would you like to see a picture of me when I was your age?" She pulled out her phone and showed Maria the old photograph. Rita Rodriguez in her leather jacket, standing next to her motorcycle, looking tough and dangerous. Maria's eyes widened. "That's you?" "That was me," Eleanor corrected. "Before I decided to become who I am now. Before I learned that being strong doesn't mean being dangerous, and being tough doesn't mean being cruel." Maria stared at the photograph for a long time. "What happened to you?" "I met a little girl who was scared, and I realized I didn't want to be the kind of person who scared children anymore. I wanted to be the kind of person who protected them instead." Over the following months, Eleanor worked with Maria, sharing her story, showing her that change was possible. It wasn't easy. Maria had her own demons to face, her own past to overcome, but slowly, she began to open up. "You really think I can change?" Maria asked one day. "I know you can," Eleanor replied, "because if Rita Rodriguez could become Eleanor Walsh, then Maria Santos can become whoever she chooses to be." 6 months later, Maria graduated from high school. She was accepted to community college with plans to study social work. At her graduation ceremony, she asked Eleanor to be there. "I want to thank someone special," Maria said during her valedictorian speech. "Someone who taught me that your past doesn't have to determine your future, that you can choose to be better than who you used to be. Eleanor, thank you for showing me that change is possible." Eleanor was crying as she watched Maria accept her diploma. Emma and Jake, who had come to the ceremony, were crying too. Look what you did, Grandma, Emma whispered. You changed her life. Eleanor shook her head. She changed her own life. I just showed her it was possible. After the ceremony, the three of them went home to Eleanor's house. As they sat on the front porch, where Eleanor used to knit quietly, Jake asked, "Do you ever miss it, being Rita?" Eleanor thought about it for a long time. "I miss the confidence," she said finally. "Rita was never afraid of anything, but I don't miss the anger, or the violence, or the constant fear. Eleanor may be quieter, but she's happier. She's surrounded by people who love her, and she gets to help other people become better versions of themselves." Emma smiled. "Maybe you didn't have to choose between being Rita and being Eleanor. Maybe you could be both. The strength of Rita with the kindness of Eleanor." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter and realized she was right. She didn't have to hide from her past anymore. She could use it to help others, to be an example of redemption and change. That night, after Emma and Jake went home, Eleanor sat in her garden, looking at the photograph of Rita Rodriguez. For the first time in 50 years, she didn't feel shame when she looked at it. She felt gratitude. Rita had been strong enough to survive. Eleanor had been wise enough to choose love. And together, they had built something beautiful. The next morning, Eleanor got a call from the youth center. Another teenager had been brought in, angry and defiant, reminding everyone of a younger version of someone they used to know. They needed Eleanor's help. Eleanor smiled as she hung up the phone. She put on her cardigan, picked up her purse, and headed out the door. She had work to do. She had lives to change. She had futures to help rebuild. And for the first time in her life, she was proud of every part of who she was, who she had been, who she had chosen to become, and who she was still becoming. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't about perfect people. They're about broken people who choose to heal, lost people who choose to find their way, and dangerous people who choose to protect instead of hurt. Eleanor Walsh was living proof that it's never too late to change your story, and she was just getting started.